Well, good evening. Good evening, and welcome to the first of the TAC talks in 2024. I have to do the necessary housekeeping to start with, namely point out fire escapes there, and there are toilets in the corridor, men's and ladies, not hard to find. So that's that. Well, as I've said, I think when I've introduced all the other talks, this is a relatively new venture here at Beverley Baptist in the Armstrong Centre. It's where we are aiming to promote discussion about in and around the big questions of life, questions that don't go away, which is our strapline. Questions that are asked by people of faith, people of no faith, people who are in the middle and not sure where they are, and so on. Unashamedly, of course, we want to tackle these questions and explain what the Christian perspective is on these big questions. But the aim is to be of relevance to anybody who's got these questions in their mind. Well, tonight our speaker is Martin Buzzer, somebody I've known for a long time, count him as a friend, and he is a reader in theoretical physics at the University of Hull, and I have to consult my notes to explain what it is his research is about. His research is in soft matter, that is to say, studying materials that are in between being a solid and a liquid. And it makes you think of something up here, maybe, I don't know. It says, in recent years, his research has focused on self-assembly, a powerful method for making tiny structures for super-fast computer chips, drug delivery, and other applications in nanotechnology. Well, I hope you're a bit wiser now, but I'm not sure that I am, but I don't know whether Martin's going to explain any of that tonight. I don't think it's his main topic, but another claim to fame is that Martin is perhaps the key person really in organising the Hull lectures, and the 2024 Hull lecture, I shall just mention it very briefly at the end, and there's some leaflets at the back which you can pick up. I think the other thing I need to say before inviting Martin is to explain the format of the evening, which is, as we always have, 40 minutes or so of talk, then a break for coffee where you can chat amongst yourselves, formulate any questions you've got, and if you're happy to do that, write your questions down on one of these pieces of paper. That's always very helpful if you can do that. If not, don't worry. So we will reconvene after we've had our coffee, and then an extended time of questions, discussion. The aim is to end formally around 9 o'clock in case anybody needs to get away, but there's always a chance to talk informally after that. I think that's all I need to mention. Oh, there is a bookstall, valiantly staffed by Anne over there, so feel free to browse. With having said all that, I think I may introduce Martin. Let's give him a welcome in this way.
Great, thank you. Thank you so much, Nigel, for that very kind invitation. So as Nigel said, I am very interested in science and faith, and normally I organize events rather than speak. So this is not perhaps a slightly unusual thing for me. So please do bear with me, and I hope what you that I can say things that are of interest and thought-provoking. So I will say a little bit about myself as a scientist and also as a believer as well, just to give a little background before my main talk. So as Nigel said, I'm a reader in physics. My research is in soft matter. I do a lot of my recent research is in self-assembly. Really, it's the process by which it's a fascinating phenomena by which small building blocks can spontaneously form complex structures, and as Nigel said, that can have a lot of applications in nanotechnology. It's a little bit like taking a box of Lego, shaking it violently, and then out pops the Millennium Falcon or something like that. You know, it sounds magical, and in some sense it is quite magical in some ways, but yet it is something that in fact is happening all around us. For example, when you freeze water into ice, what's happening at a molecular level is that the molecules spontaneously change from a disordered state into an ordered array. Or maybe those of you who have children, when the way that they grow from babies into complex adults is another kind of form of self-assembly. I mean, there's a little bit of disorder when they become teenagers, but anyway, that's a sort of separate topic. But so hopefully, understanding self-assembly gives us an understanding about a lot of phenomena in the world around us. So that's me as a scientist. I just also thought I'd just share a little bit about my own faith journey as well. So I'm a Christian, but I do not come from a Christian family. I wasn't brought up as a Christian. I guess my first contact with Christianity came from attending a nursery that was run by a church. And so I guess in that sense, from a young age, I had a sense that there was a God. But it was really only when I was 12, my best friend at the time invited me to attend his church youth group. And it's a very strange thing, but from the first meeting that I attended, I had a very strong sense that God was there and I needed to reconnect with him. And really that was the start when I seriously thought about Christianity. And really through attending the youth group and church on Sunday, I gradually understood the Christian faith and became a Christian. I can't really pinpoint a time when I did that, when that happened, but that's through a gradual process. But even though I can't pinpoint a time when I became a Christian, I think what is clear to me is that following Jesus is the best decision that I've ever made in my life. Because, for example, I've seen how God has answered my prayers for myself and also my family and other people on numerous occasions. I've experienced unexpected peace and joy when I trusted God during a brush I had with cancer during my early married life. And this is probably a good time to give a shout out to my wife, my lovely wife, who's sitting over there. I've also, whenever I've been confused about different questions in life, I've heard God speaking to me clearly through the Bible or through things I've heard in church or through things that people have said at just the right time and exactly the right sort of things that I needed. I've experienced incredible peace at different crossroads in my life when the future was uncertain. And I think something that's perhaps increasingly relevant to me these days, I haven't felt depressed, okay, when I see that I can no longer do things that I used to be able to do because I'm getting older. And also I no longer fear the thought of dying, okay, because I know where I'm going. Okay? So I think that just thought just share a few things on that. But anyway, the main point of today, okay, so here is my talk. Are science and God compatible? So I wanted to cover this topic in three different broad themes. The first is, does science contradict faith generally? But when people talk about the relationship between science and faith, I mean, often the first thing that people think about is the contradiction between science and faith with regards to origins, questions of origins of life, origins of the universe, etc. So in the second part, I want to talk more specifically about the relationship between the Bible and scientific theories, for example, the Big Bang and evolution. Now, so after these first 2 points, hopefully I will have shown you that there is no contradiction between science and faith. But are there any sort of positive reasons as a scientist why I want to believe in God? In other words, are there any aspects of science? I mean, I know there's no contradiction, but is it just the fact that they have nothing to do with each other? Or does science in any sense point towards God? Okay, and I want to show you that I believe it does, and I want to explain to you why it is that I believe in God as a scientist. Okay, so let's start with the first question. Does science contradict faith in a general sense? Well, some scientists definitely think so. So here is a quote from a very, very famous scientist, Professor Francis Crick, who's a co-discoverer of the structure of DNA, the molecule that encodes all our the genetic information of all of life, in fact. And here is what he says. He says that the beliefs of most popular religions by scientific standards are based on evidence so flimsy that only an act of blind faith can make them acceptable. Okay, so clearly, Professor Crick thinks there is a fundamental contradiction between science and faith. But it has to be said that that view is not shared, definitely not shared by all scientists. So here is another quote by another eminent scientist, Professor Francis Collins, who is the director of the Human Genome Project. So he led an international team that was the first to completely map out the genetic code of human beings. I mean, it's amazing when you think about how huge the human genome is. It is an incredible scientific feat. And here's what he says. He's clearly a believer, a Christian. He says, we must ourselves be prepared and willing to make a reasoned presentation of our faith, especially to young scientists who have all too often concluded that a serious faith in a personal God and objective pursuit of scientific truth are incompatible. Okay? So clearly, Francis Collins thinks, in fact, they are compatible, and we need to get the word out to the general public. So, do science and faith contradict each other? Well, you won't be surprised that I believe they do not. Well, that's because science is primarily concerned with the physical world and seeks to answer how questions. Okay? How was the world created? How does the world work? Faith, on the other hand, is, of course, concerned with God and seeks to answer questions about who and why questions. Who created the world? Why did he create the world? Is there meaning and purpose to life? So both science and faith are seeking to explain reality, but at different levels. Okay? So in other words, they are complementary rather than contradictory. To get a full understanding of the world around us and our lives, we need both types of explanations. So let me give you an example to explain what I mean. Perhaps you've heard of this already. That is the question, why is the kettle boiling? Well, one possible answer to this question is that when you heat the water in the kettle, the molecules jiggle around faster and faster and faster until they have enough energy to break free from the surface of the water and escape into the air, at which point the water boils. Now, another possible answer to the question, why is the kettle boiling, is the kettle is boiling because I want a cup of tea. Now, clearly, I mean, these two answers are not contradictory. I mean, they're complementary. They're just explaining the same phenomena at different levels. And actually, to most people, and you know, including myself, when I want a cup of tea, probably the second answer is much more important, actually. So, if science and faith are complementary, why do so many people think that they're contradictory? Well, I believe it is because many people in society today believe that the only reliable form of knowledge about the world is scientific knowledge, and that nothing exists outside the physical world. This idea is called naturalism, okay? Naturalism, as I've just said, it says that the only reliable knowledge is scientific knowledge. Nothing exists outside of the physical world. And in fact, this is the assumption that lies behind the quote from Francis Crick that I quoted right at the start of my talk. However, it should be pointed out that naturalism is in fact not scientific because it itself cannot be proven by science. And this is because science only studies the physical world, and therefore cannot tell us whether or not anything exists outside of the physical world. In other words, naturalism is not science, it's an assumption. It's a philosophical assumption. In order to explain this point more clearly, let me give you an example. Let's consider someone standing under a street lamp at night. Naturalism is like somebody who says, because they can only see what is under the street lamp, nothing exists beyond the street lamp. Now, this person has come to a wrong conclusion about the world because they've not understood the limitation of what they can see. Now, in the same way, someone who says that because science can only study the physical world, nothing exists outside the physical world, has come to a wrong conclusion about reality because they've not understood the limitations of science. So, as I just said earlier, naturalism really is not something that has been proven by science. It's really a reflection of our lack of knowledge, or certainly than anything. It's an assumption. It's an assumption about the world. Now, in fact, we know that from our own experience, there are many other types of knowledge other than scientific knowledge that are just as valid and just as important. For example, if you want to get to know a friend, you wouldn't take them to the physics lab in Hull University and analyze them, okay? And and those are probably more like medics, but anyway, imagine they're kind of our students, okay, analyzing you. It's not a very pleasant thought, but anyway. Well, why not? Well, because this would give you some knowledge about your friend, okay? But it will give you scientific knowledge about them, okay? For example, what chemicals they're made of, okay? But it wouldn't really help you to know them as a person. Instead, to get to know your friend as a person, this is much more pleasant, isn't it? Picture, you would need to talk to them and listen to them. Now, in the same way, if I want to know God, I need to talk to him through prayer and listen to him through reading the Bible, for example. And this type of knowledge is called personal knowledge, and it is just as valid and just as important as scientific knowledge. And in fact, if you think about it, in our everyday life, it's not just in the religious sphere, in our day-to-day lives, from our family and friends to the world of business and politics, this type of personal knowledge is generally much more important than scientific knowledge. So hopefully that's helped to kind of set the scene a little bit and show that in fact there's no general contradiction between science and faith, okay? Because they're complementary. They're seeking to explain reality at different levels. So the second point about my talk, the next question I want to explore is whether science, and in particular the scientific theories of the Big Bang and evolution, contradict what the Bible says about the origin of the world. And yeah, I'm sure this is a huge topic, okay? So I'm really just going to scratch the surface, and maybe you can come back with some questions later on in the Q&A. But before answering this question, what I want to do is just, first of all, let's look at what science says about the origin of the world. We'll then look in more detail what the Bible says about the origin of the world, and then we will then be in a better position to say whether or not there is a contradiction between the two. So let's start with science. We'll start with the Big Bang. So the Big Bang theory is the main scientific theory for the origin of the universe today. And I'm sure many of you have heard of it. It's already very much in the popular sphere, isn't it? So this basically says that the universe began around 14 billion years ago through a massive explosion or Big Bang. starting from a very small and dense point, which is represented by that, schematically, by that red dot on the left in that diagram. Now, almost all scientists now accept the Big Bang. I mean, that's certainly not true always. I think probably since the last 50 years or so. Okay, I think that has become the dominant theory in cosmology. And they accepted it because it's based on several important pieces of evidence. The most important one of which is the fact that the universe is expanding. So I feel a bit nervous with my colleague in astrophysics sitting there, but I'm sure she'll correct me. I'm not saying anything too detailed or controversial here, I'm sure. Sorry, good so far. Thank you for the encouragement. And the point about this, because the question of age is the one that I want to focus on particularly for this part. We can measure the rate of expansion very, very accurately. And basically that means that by playing back the video, as it were, we therefore can work out the age of the universe very accurately. That's how we've arrived at the age of 14 billion or thereabouts. So that's the Big Bang theory. Next, I want to talk about evolution. Well, the main scientific theory for the origin of life is the theory of evolution, which was proposed by Charles Darwin in 1859. This theory basically says that life started out from a few simple forms, which is represented sort of in this diagram by the root in this evolutionary tree. And these gradually evolved into a huge variety of more complex life forms over a long period of time. And again, there are several important pieces of evidence supporting evolution. One of the main ones, of course, is the fossil record. And there are others, in fact, particularly relating to genetics, but we'll sort of skip that unless people want to ask about that. And basically, the fossil record shows that life started on Earth around 4 billion years ago, and it became increasingly complex with time. And again, I want to focus on the question of time again, because the question of time is a very important one in this whole discussion. So it's worth explaining how we measure the age of fossils. So the dating of fossils is basically based on independent measurements of several different long-lived radioactive substances. And the point is that people measure the age of fossils using a number of different radioactive isotopes, and the independent measurements from these different radioactive substances or isotopes agrees with each other to within 1%. Okay, so that gives us confidence that the ages that we measure are accurate. And therefore, this shows that life on Earth has indeed existed for billions of years. Okay, so that's really a very whistle-stop tour of science. Oops, that's my punchline. Don't just forget you saw that. I want to now talk about the Bible, in particular, of course, the first book of the Bible, Genesis. So science says that both the universe and life developed over the course of billions of years. At first sight, this seems to contradict the book of Genesis, which says that God created the world in 6 days. So, does the scientific account for the origin of life in the universe contradict Genesis? Well, the answer to this question hinges on this question. How should we interpret the word day in Genesis? Should we interpret day literally as an actual 24-hour period, in which case there clearly is a contradiction between science and Genesis? Or should we interpret day figuratively as a period of time of unknown length, in which case there's no contradiction between science and Genesis? Now, of course, this is a very, very contentious question, okay? It's become very, very controversial because of the whole creation and evolution debate. I mean, particularly in the States, but to some extent also in other parts of the world as well. Now, in particular, figurative interpretations of the creation story and the word day in particular are treated with suspicion by some Christians, since such interpretations could be accused of compromising on biblical truth as a result of caving into science, okay? Now, I mean, that's a fair point. I think as human beings, we like to pick and choose what we like to hear, okay? And particularly when it comes to the Bible, that certainly is very often very true. So in order to avoid this problem, it's very useful actually to ask how Christians before Darwin interpreted the early chapters of Genesis, since their views would not have been colored by the current debate between creation and evolution. So what I want to do briefly now is just take a very brief tour of church history, and in particular some of the main sort of Christian thinkers or theologians who thought about this question in the past. So the first quote, I hope people can see that. The text might be a little bit small, but I will read it out to you as well. So the first quote is by somebody called Origen. As you can see, he lived just a few hundred, about 100 or 200 AD or thereabouts. Okay, very, very early church leader. And speaking particularly about this question of the interpretation of the word day in Genesis, he said, "What person of intelligence, I ask, will consider as a reasonable statement that the first and second and third day, in which there are said to be both morning and evening, existed without sun and moon and stars, while the first day was even without heaven? I do not think that anyone will doubt that these are figurative expressions which indicate certain mysteries to a semblance of history." There's a little bit of a dense text, apologize, but hopefully you will get the gist of what Origen is saying. Basically, if you read the book of Genesis, or Genesis chapter 1, you see he's talking about the sequence in that creation story, right? In day 1, God separated light from darkness. In day 2, he separated the sky from the seas. In day 3, he separated the land from the sea. In day 4, only did he create the sun, moon, and stars, and then he created the birds and the fish and the animals and human beings, etc., etc., etc. So what Origen is saying is that how could the word day in Genesis 1 mean day in our usual understanding of the word, i.e. a 24-hour period, when there was no sun in the first 3 days? What does a day even mean in that particular context? Now, fair point, okay? So next, I want to show you a quote from St. Augustine, who lived a little bit later on, about 400 AD, around the fall of Rome, actually. So Augustine is arguably the greatest Christian thinker of all time, okay, in church history. And he actually was fascinated by the book of Genesis, and he wrote a lot of commentaries on Genesis, sort of commented. And so here's a quote where, again, he talks about this particular issue. And he says this, "What kind of days these were it is extremely difficult, or perhaps impossible for us to conceive. Perhaps sacred scripture, in its customary style, is speaking within the limitations of human language in addressing men of limited understanding." Again, let me just kind of perhaps unpack this a little bit in case you found that a little bit turgid. What Augustine is saying, basically, is that it's very difficult to determine what the word day in Genesis means precisely. Okay? And Augustine also says that this ambiguity may come from the fact that the author's main aim is not to give a detailed scientific account of creation. Okay? Because really, the Bible is not just written for the scholars. Okay? It's written for everyone. Okay? And it wants to tell us something about God, both to the educated as well as the uneducated. It is clear from these comments that these early church leaders did not think that a literal interpretation of day as a 24-hour period was consistent with the biblical text. Instead, they thought that it was more consistent to interpret the word day figuratively as a period of unknown length. Now, I emphasize once again that the statements that I've just quoted were made more than 1,000 years, in fact more than 1,500 years, before the whole creation and evolution debate. So these early church leaders were not influenced by science when they made these statements. Their conclusion about how the word day in Genesis should be interpreted was purely based on what they felt was the most faithful to the biblical text itself. So, if we follow the interpretation that says that the word day is a time period of unknown length rather than a 24-hour period, then there is in fact no contradiction between science and the Bible regarding the origin of life in the universe, at least on this fairly important point. Okay? I think there are other points that you might want to discuss as well. Maybe again we can pick that up in the Q&A if you'd like. But having said all that, if our main focus in reading Genesis is to discover how the world was made, I think we've missed the point of the book. Because this is in fact not the primary aim of Genesis at all. Why not? Well, this is because even if we understood fully how the world was created scientifically, it would not help us answer the question of why we are here. Instead, Genesis, and indeed the rest of the Bible, is seeking to answer the more important questions of why was the world created and who created the world. Because only when we understand the answer to these questions will we understand why we exist in the universe. So really, this comes back to the point I made in the first point of my talk. Science and the Bible are seeking to explain reality we experience, but at different levels. One at the level of the physical world, the other at the level of meaning and purpose. They are complementary, not contradictory. To get a full understanding of the world around us and our lives, we need both types of explanation. Great. So hopefully, from the first 2 points of my talk, I've been able to show you that science and faith do not contradict each other. For the last part of my talk then, I want to ask the question, okay, we know that, well, hopefully you're convinced that they're not contradictory, but does science in any way positively point to the existence of God? So are there any positive reasons why somebody who is serious about science can also, and indeed should also, believe in God? And I believe that there are. And I want to give you two reasons. The first reason why I believe in God as a scientist is the fact that there are many aspects of science that instead of contradicting the existence of God, actually point strongly to the existence of God. Now, there are many examples that I can give for this. But one of my favorite as a physicist is the fact that the universe follows maths. Okay? Now, at this point, okay, maybe half the audience is thinking, wait, I didn't sign up for this. Okay, this is about science and faith. Why are you bringing maths into this? Okay? But okay, just humor me for the moment, okay? Now, let me just explain a little bit more what I mean. Okay, Nigel will be very happy, I'm sure, about this part anyway. So when I say maths here, I don't mean things like numbers or lengths or shapes, etc., which are obviously related to things in the world. And of course, the universe does follow this type of maths as well. Instead, What I'm talking about is the abstract mathematics that you would study if you did a maths or physics degree at university. The type of maths that at first sight seems to have nothing to do with the world around us, but was thought up by mathematicians because they were interesting in their own right, okay? Yet, many years later, when people tried to describe the features of the universe that were hidden from us in the past, they found that they could only do so using such abstract mathematics. One of the most striking examples of this is the example of complex numbers. Okay, so why does the universe follow math? Okay, well, what are complex numbers? Well, we're all familiar with real numbers, okay? For example, numbers like 1, 2, 3, okay? That's all right, just about. So what's a complex number? So a complex number is a number that consists of two parts. A real part, which is a real number, and an imaginary part, which is a real number multiplied by I, okay? Where I, as you see, is the square root of -1. Okay? As I said, humor me, okay, right? Well, why is it so weird to take the square root of a negative number like -1? Well, that's because when you square a number, that's the opposite of square root, okay? When you square a number, you always get a positive number. You never get a negative number, okay? Because two negatives make a positive, two positive also makes a positive, okay? So at first sight, it seems really weird that you would want to take the square root of a negative number. It doesn't seem to make sense. But you know what mathematicians are like, okay? They never take no for an answer, okay? At least not initially. So some mathematicians started to say, well, what if, for the sake of argument, we could take the square root of a negative number, okay? And let's define the square root of -1 as a special number, which we call I. To their amazement, when they did this, suddenly a number of things in pure maths which didn't make sense before started to make a lot of sense. And in fact, the idea of complex numbers also generated a lot of new and interesting results in pure mathematics. Great. Okay, the mathematicians are happy. Okay, they can do what do their thing. So the concept of complex numbers was invented by mathematicians around 450 years ago. And as I said, although complex numbers seem to make sense in the context of pure maths, it didn't seem to correspond to anything in reality. However, 350 years later, when physicists were trying to explain the behavior of very small objects such as atoms, molecules, and subatomic particles, things, as I said, that were hidden from people in times past, they found that they could only do so when they used complex numbers. And this gave birth to a branch of physics which we call quantum mechanics. Okay, so here you see on the bottom left there sort of a schematic of the atoms and molecules. On the right, bottom right, is the Large Hadron Collider in Switzerland, sort of studying the properties of subatomic particles. And above it, you've got this beautiful or maybe scary equation, depending on your point of view, called the Schrödinger equation. It was a very fundamental equation in quantum mechanics, and there's lots of squiggly things. But the thing that I want to point your attention to is that first symbol on the left-hand side. What's that symbol? I. Okay? Now that I there is not just there for decoration. Okay? It's absolutely vital. Okay? If we did not have that imaginary number, the whole machinery of quantum mechanics just would not work. Okay? It is absolutely integral. It's at the heart of quantum mechanics. Now, complex numbers rather, are just one example of how the laws of physics follow abstract and beautiful mathematics. There are many other examples of this, which I won't go into, you'll be glad to know, okay? But this fact is so surprising that many scientists who are not believers have been astonished by it. So here, for example, is a quote by Eugene Wigner, a very brilliant Nobel Prize-winning physicist in the post-war era. He wrote a very famous article, actually, called, as you see in the bottom there, The Unreasonable Effectiveness of Mathematics in the Natural Sciences. And in that, he said the following. He said, you can easily Google this article and find it right at the end of this article. It says, the miracle of the appropriateness of the language of mathematics for the formulation of the laws of physics is a wonderful gift which we neither understand nor deserve. Okay? It's almost bordering on religious language, okay, the way he's talking about this. Here's another quote. Probably somebody you would recognize. Probably the most famous physicist of all time, Albert Einstein. He went even further and said, the most incomprehensible thing about the universe is that it is comprehensible. Okay? I mean, if you think about it, it's true. I mean, why? Why should the complex workings of the world follow abstract mathematics that we thought up independently? Or why should it? I mean, there's absolutely no reason for that. And in fact, why should it even be understandable by our minds in the first place? Okay? That is absolutely stunning, okay, if you stop to think about it. But the amazing thing is that the universe is understandable by our minds, understandable by the sort of maths that we do. However, this amazing feature of the universe makes complete sense if there was a rational designer behind the universe, the one who not only created the universe, but also our rational minds. So that's the first reason why I believe in God as a scientist, or at least sort of where I think science or reality points strongly to the existence of God, the fact that the universe follows maths. The second reason why I believe in God as a scientist is because a worldview that is based only on science and assumes that there's no God does not fit in with my experience of reality. For example, if there's no God and atoms and molecules are all that there is, then things like meaning, love, good and evil, beauty, truth and justice, and even rational thought itself are just the result of our imagination, and they're not real. Okay, but they're just projections, because really, these things we know, only the material world exists. Okay, all these things that we operate on are just imagination. As I said earlier in my talk, many people in society say they believe this. Certainly many of my students, when I've spoken about topics like this, say that's basically their starting assumption. But my observation is that nobody actually lives like this. Okay, we may say we believe this, but we don't live like this. Why not? Because it does not fit. It just does not fit with our experience of reality. But if there is a God, it would explain why there is meaning and purpose in our lives, why human beings have value and dignity, and why we can have hope in the face of death. It's not just wishful thinking. I mean, this is something that no worldview or philosophy that's based only on science can offer. Great. Okay, that's pretty much me done. So, are science and God compatible? And I hope after this talk you will see there's not a maybe or a tentative yes. Okay, I would say it's an emphatic yes. Why? First, because science and faith are not contradictory, but complementary, okay? Explaining reality at different levels. Secondly, are science and God compatible? Yes, because many aspects of science point strongly to the existence of God. For example, as I said, the fact that the universe is understandable by a human mind, etc. And thirdly, they are compatible because belief in God allows us to make sense of all of life in a way that is simply not possible if we hold to a view of the world that is based only on science. Okay, so that's all I want to say. So thank you very much for your kind attention. Great.
Thank you very much, Martin. Well, we're going to break now, but take time to think about questions because there's plenty of time for an extended question and answer session. If you're able to, write questions on one of these pieces of paper and pop it on the front here, but there'll also be a roving microphone if you're not comfortable in doing that. Thank you, Martin. You've given us lots to think about. So break for coffee and 15 minutes or so. We'll just, when everybody's fed and watered, then we'll reconvene. That's okay. Thanks again. Right.